So, have you ever stopped to think about who's actually making sure the bank that holds your savings or your mortgage is playing it safe? After the 2008 financial crisis, Europe had to completely tear down and rebuild its system for watching over the banks. What they built is this really fascinating, multi layered defense network. And honestly, understanding how it works is absolutely key to understanding the stability of our entire economy.
All right, let's get into it. First, we're going to look back at the crisis that really changed everything. Then, we'll meet the three main players in this whole financial protection game: the one who writes the rules, the one who supervises the biggest banks, and the local guys on the ground. And finally, we'll see how they all come together to form a united front. You see, to really get why this whole new system even exists, we have to go back to that global financial crisis. This wasn't just a case of one bank or one country messing up. No, this was a total systemic meltdown, and it really laid bare some deep, deep flaws in the old way of doing things. This quote really just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the problem. Banks weren't holding on to the loans they were making anymore. Instead, they were bundling them up and selling them off to investors all over the world. And what that meant was that all these super risky American mortgages, the toxic stuff, ended up infecting banks all across Europe, putting the entire global system on the brink of collapse. So, in the chaos that followed, the EU basically said, okay, we need to figure out what went wrong. And the report they commissioned? Well, the findings were pretty damning. It turned out Europe's financial rulebook was a total mess, a patchwork quilt of different rules. Every country had its own little loopholes and variations, which made it impossible for anyone to see the huge risks that were building up. The takeaway was crystal clear. They needed a complete overhaul, a single, strong line of defense. So, how do you even begin to build a new defense system like that? Well, you can't enforce the law until you actually write the law, right? What Europe needed was a single architect, someone to design one solid, consistent set of blueprints for every single bank to build from. And that architect is the European Banking Authority, or the EBA. Now, its main job isn't to be peeking over the shoulder of every bank every single day. No, its job is to create what's called the single rulebook. Basically, one high, consistent standard that slams all those old loopholes shut and applies to every financial institution across the entire EU. And besides writing the rules, the EBA has another absolutely critical job. It runs these massive EU-wide stress tests. Seriously, you can think of it like a fire drill for the entire financial system. They throw simulated economic crises at the banks just to see who can handle the heat. For you, this means that the bank holding your savings has been put through its paces, making sure it's ready for a tough economic storm. It's all about keeping your money safer. Okay, so the EBA writes the playbook. But who's the head referee on the field? Who's the lead supervisor? Especially for those giant banks whose failure could literally bring the whole system crashing down. That's where the European Central Bank steps in, through a system called the Single Supervisory Mechanism, or SSM. So if you imagine the financial system as a huge city, the ECB's SSM is like the central watchtower, with a direct, eagle-eye view of all the tallest, most important skyscrapers. But here's the thing. The ECB isn't watching every single little building in the city. It focuses its energy on what are called significant institutions. And how a bank gets that label really shows you how the system targets risk. A bank is considered significant if it meets any of these criteria, like having over 30 billion euros in assets or being one of the top 3 biggest banks in its home country. Basically, these are the banks that are just too big, too connected, or too important to be allowed to fail without causing massive economic damage. And the ECB doesn't go it alone. The real on-the-ground supervision is done by what are called Joint Supervisory Teams, or JSTs. Think of these as mixed teams that bring together the best of both worlds. You get the big picture, Europe-wide perspective from the ECB, combined with the incredibly valuable local, boots-on-the-ground knowledge from the national banking supervisors. Which, of course, brings us to a super important question. If the ECB is watching that handful of giant skyscrapers, who's keeping an eye on the thousands upon thousands of smaller buildings that make up the rest of the financial city? I mean, the sheer scale here is just mind-boggling. Just take Germany, for example. It's home to almost 1,500 smaller banks. That's nearly half of all the small banks in the entire Eurozone. There's just no way a single central body could watch them all effectively, and this is exactly where the national authorities come into play. So here's how the work is divided up, and it's actually pretty clear. The ECB handles the big fish, the significant institutions, or SIs. Meanwhile, national bodies, like Germany's BaFin and Bundesbank, act as the local police on the financial beat. They take direct responsibility for supervising the thousands of less significant institutions, or LSIs. Okay, so we've met the architect, the central watchtower, and the local police force. Now let's put all these pieces together and see how this multi-layered system really does create a united front.
This right here is the core idea. It's a three-tiered system built for total coverage. First, you have the EBA creating one set of rules for everybody. Then, the ECB uses those exact same rules to directly watch over the biggest, most important players. And finally, the national authorities apply those very same rules to keep an eye on every other bank in their country. It all works together.
So, why does any of this matter to you? Well, this isn't just some abstract bureaucratic setup. This whole integrated system is the safety net designed to stop another 2008 from ever happening again. It's there to protect the real-world economy that we all depend on, the one that holds our savings, gives us loans, and secures our financial future. You know, there's absolutely no doubt that Europe has built a much stronger and more unified financial defense system since the last crisis. But the world keeps changing, and so do the risks, from climate change to cyber threats. And that leaves us with one last really critical question to chew on. Is this new architecture truly ready for whatever the next storm might be?